Hey guys, Lord Naren White here, the Holy Ghost, the one true God, back with you with the next video in my series reading The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Without further ado, returning to The Picture of Dorian Gray as read by Lord Naren White. Now and then she stopped and peered back. Once she began to sing in a hoarse voice. The policeman strolled over and said something to her. She stumbled away, laughing. A bitter blast swept across the square. The gas lamps flickered and became blue, and the leafless trees shook their black iron branches as if in pain. He shivered and went back, closing the window behind him. He passed to the door, turned the key, and opened it. He did not even glance at the murdered man. He felt that the secret of the whole thing was not to realize the situation. The friend who had painted the fatal portrait, the portrait to which all his misery had been due, had gone out of his life. That was enough. Then he remembered the lamp. It was a rather curious one of Moorish workmanship, made of dull silver inlaid with arabesques of burnished steel. Perhaps it might be missed by a servant, and questions would be asked. He turned back and took it from the table. How still the man was! How horribly white the long hands looked! He was like a dreadful wax image. He locked the door behind him and crept quietly downstairs. The woodwork creaked and seemed to cry out as if in pain. He stopped several times and waited. No, everything was still. It was merely the sound of his own footsteps. When he reached the library, he saw the bag and coat in the corner. They must be hidden away somewhere. He unlocked a secret press that was in the wainscoting and put them into it. He could easily burn them afterwards. Then he pulled out his watch. It was 22 minutes. It was 20 minutes to 2. He sat down and began to think. Every year, every month, men were strangled in England for what he had done. There had been a madness of murder in the air. Some red star had come too close to earth. Evidence? What evidence was there against him? Basil Hallward had left the house at 11. No one had seen him come in again. Most of the servants were at Selby Royal. His valet had gone to bed. Paris. Yes, it was to Paris that Basil had gone, by the midnight train as he had intended. With his curious reserved habits, it would be months before any suspicions would be aroused. Months? Everything could be destroyed long before then. A sudden thought struck him. He put on his fur coat and hat and went out into the hall. There he paused, hearing the slow, heavy tread of the policeman outside on the pavement, and seeing the flash of the lantern reflected in the window. He waited, holding his breath. After a few moments he opened the front door and slipped out, shutting it very gently behind him. Then he began ringing the bell. In about 10 minutes his valet appeared, half-dressed and looking very drowsy. "I'm very sorry to have had you wake up, Francis," he said, stepping in, "but I had forgotten my latchkey. What time is it?" "2:05, sir," answered the man, looking at the clock and yawning. 5 minutes past 2? How horribly late! You must wake me at 9 tomorrow. I have some work to do." "All right, sir." "Did anyone call this evening?" "Mr. Hallward, sir. He stayed here till 11, and then he went away to catch his train." "Oh, I'm sorry I didn't see him. Did he leave any message?" "No, sir, except that he would write to you." "That will do, Francis. Don't forget to call me at 9 tomorrow." "No, sir." The man shambled down the passage in his slippers. Dorian Gray threw his hat and coat upon the yellow marble table and passed into the library. He walked up and down the room for a quarter of an hour, biting his lip and thinking. Then he took the blue book down from one of the shelves and began to turn over the leaves. Alan Campbell, 152 Hertford Street, Mayfair. Yes, that was the man he wanted. Chapter 12. At 9 o'clock the next morning, his servant came in with a cup of chocolate on a tray and opened the shutters. Dorian was sleeping quite peacefully, lying on his right side with one hand underneath his cheek. He looked like a boy who had been tired out with play or study. The man had to touch him twice on the shoulder before he woke, and as he opened his eyes, a faint smile passed across his lips, as though he had been having some delightful dream. Yet he had not dreamed at all. His night had been untroubled by any images of pleasure or of pain. But youth smiles without any reason. It is one of its chiefest charms. He turned round, and, leaning on his elbow, began to drink his chocolate. The mellow November sun was streaming into the room. The sky was bright blue, and there was a genial warmth in the air. It was almost like a morning in May. Gradually, the events of the preceding night crept with silent blood-stained feet into his brain and reconstructed themselves there with terrible distinctness. He winced at the memory of all that he had suffered, and for a moment the same curious feeling of loathing for Basil Hallward that had made him kill him as he sat in the chair came back to him, and he grew cold with passion. The dead man was sitting there too, and in the sunlight now. How horrible that was! Such hideous things were for the darkness, not for the day. He felt that if he brooded on what he had gone through, he would sicken or grow mad. There were sins whose fascination was more in the memory than in the doing of them, strange triumphs that grateful the pride more than the passions, and gave to the intellect a quickened sense of joy greater than any joy they brought, or could ever bring to the senses. But this was not one of them. It was a thing to be driven out of the mind, to be drugged with poppies, to be strangled lest it might strangle oneself. He passed his hand across his forehead, and then got up hastily, and dressed himself with even more than his usual attention, giving a good deal of care to the selection of his necktie and scarf pin, and changing his rings more than once. He spent a long time over breakfast, tasting the various dishes, talking to his valet about some new liveries that he was thinking of getting made for the servants at Selby, and going through his correspondence. Over some of the letters he smiled. 3 of them bored him. One he read several times over, and then tore up with a slight look of annoyance in his face. "That awful thing, a woman's memory," as Lord Henry had once said. When he had drunk his coffee, he sat down at the table and wrote 2 letters. One he put in his pocket, and the other he handed to the valet. "Take this round to 152 Hertford Street, Francis, and if Mr. Campbell is out of town, get his address." As soon as he was alone, he lit a cigarette and began sketching upon a piece of paper, drawing flowers and bits of architecture first and then faces. Suddenly he remarked that every face that he drew seemed to have an extraordinary likeness to Basil Hallward. He frowned and, getting up, went over to the bookcase and took out a volume at hazard. He was determined that he would not think about what had happened till it became absolutely necessary to do so. When he had stretched himself on the sofa, he looked at the title page of the book. It was Gautier's Images et Camées, Charpenter's Japanese paper edition, with the Jacquemart etching. The binding was of citron green leather with a design of gilt trellis work and dotted pomegranates. It had been given to him by Adrian Singleton. As he turned over the pages, his eyes fell on the poem about the hand of Lacenaire, the cold yellow hand. Du supplice encore mal levé, with its downy red hairs and its dohit de fond. He glanced at his own white taper fingers and passed on, till he came to those lovely verses upon Venice. Sur une gamme chromatique, les scènes de parler ruisselante, la Venus de la Adriatique, sort de luz son corps rose et blanc. Les domes sur l'azur des ondes, souvent la fraise a pour contour, s'enflant comme des gorges rondes, que ça vaut un soupir d'amour. Le skifique à bord et me dépose, jetant son amare au pilier, devant une facade rose, sur le marbre d'un escalier. How exquisite they were! As one read them, one seemed to be floating down the green waterways of the pink and pearl city, lying in a black gondola with silver prow and trailing curtains. We'll go ahead and stop there for this week. As usual, I want to say thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. Please like, comment, and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. Light be with you all. Take care, and thanks again